Welcome to lecture number 40. The topic is 4.12, African Americans in the Early Republic. The main theme for today is social structures. The learning objective is explain the continuities and changes in the experience of African Americans from 1800 to 1848. The first of two key concepts covers anti-slavery in the South. It says anti-slavery efforts in the South were largely limited to unsuccessful slave rebellions. Unsuccessful slave rebellions usually had failed because the people who were planning them were found out, or they were betrayed before the rebellion was carried out, as was the case in Denmark Vesey's rebellion. The most famous rebellion of this period is Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. This one got off the ground when a group of enslaved people, led by Nat Turner, go out and kill all the white people they encounter. That includes men, women, or children. They end up killing about 50 people, and they ultimately fail to gain their freedom as they are caught and surrounded by a militia that forms in response to their attacks. Turner and his supporters get caught in a standoff, and the militia overwhelm the enslaved men and capture Nat Turner alive. Turner is eventually executed, but before he's executed, he is interviewed and gives a full confession. Turner believed that he had been called upon by God to lead this rebellion, and showed no remorse because of it. The brutality of the uprising and Turner's unrepentant confession inspired fear into Southerners. Their response was to pass harsher slave codes that made it more difficult for another insurrection like this to take place. There were other forms of subtle resistance enslaved people would employ in the South. While on plantations, they could work slowly, pretend to be sick, or break tools, and it would lead to negative stereotypes of laziness of enslaved people. These negative stereotypes would then be ascribed to all people who were black because the main experience of the enslaver was that the people who were enslaved would not do the work that was assigned to them. Another way in which people could resist their enslavement was by simply running away. This was more common for males because women would often have children of their own that made the ability to escape more difficult. Some women were able to get away, but they might have been single without children or made the difficult decision to leave their children behind. One of the best accounts of a runaway woman is written by Harriet Jacobs. She details her journey to try and escape her enslavement, and comment to many women that were trying to escape slavery, she had to go back for her child because it was very painful to leave her behind. In her escape, she had to spend several years in the hidden crawl space, only able to see light and the outside world through a small hole in the wall. The use of the Underground Railroad begins in the early 1840s, and it will continue into the Civil War. Anyone who escaped up to the north was still at risk of being found out or being found by a bounty hunter that would bring them back to the south. Sometimes free black Americans living in the north were still at risk of bounty hunters for being mistaken for someone who had run away and be forced back into slavery. An account similar to this was written by Solomon Northup, titled 12 Years a Slave. It was published in his own lifetime and was widely read as abolitionist literature. The last key concept says, enslaved blacks and free African Americans created communities and strategies to protect their dignity and family structures, and they joined political efforts aimed at changing their status. The beginning of a black church congregation, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, is an example of these early communities. It is still around today and was founded in the year 1816. Its beginnings go back to segregatory church services. In the north, the white congregations would worship separately from the black congregations. So black Americans decided to create their own churches. Marriages between enslaved and emancipated partners in the South were common. It's one of the reasons why there were still people who were freed black people in the South and chose not to leave. They wanted to stay close to their families, wives, or partners. The offspring of these marriages would always follow the status of the mother. If the mother was free, then the child would be free. But if the mother was enslaved, then the child would also be enslaved and be considered the property of the mother's enslaver. If that was the case, the father and the mother would try to work and get enough money to try and purchase the freedom of the child. It was allowed, but it was always at the discretion of the enslaver. Because families were always at risk of separation, any time that someone was sold off into a different plantation, a new surrogate family was created for those that had no direct kinship on the plantation. These are families that were not blood related, but they provided care especially for young children that were sold into a plantation away from their blood families. The enslaved population nearly doubles from 1830 to 1860. There were almost about 2 million enslaved people in 1830 and 3.9 million people in 1860. This is all happening through natural increase, as there were no more imported enslaved people into the United States after 1808. Those that were imported in that period were imported illegally and did not substantially change the numbers of enslaved. The enslaved could have families under their own accord and choose to have children. Other times, women would be bred as if they were cattle to produce more offspring, to have more workers on the plantation, or to sell them off to gain more capital. There were political efforts to fight enslavement in the South. The Liberty Party, as was mentioned in the last lecture, ran presidential candidates in 1840 and 1844 with the aim of trying to end slavery across the entire United States. but they were a minor third party and were not a serious contender for winning the presidency. Alright, here is your recap. There were many ways in which people resisted enslavement. Rebellions usually did not succeed. The enslaved and emancipated people attempted to maintain their communities and relationships as best they could. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click on the video link on the screen, and if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back on the next lecture.